The Thief and the Lucky Boy, a Luck Gods novella. Written by J. Gabriel Gates. Performed by Paige Reisenfeld. The first thing Cleo stole when she arrived in Detroit was a pair of sunglasses. The Chanel knockoff sat on a swiveling display at the Car Museum gift shop, and she swiped them, removed the tags, and slipped them onto her face almost without breaking stride. Too easy. But then, thievery was a way of life for Cleo, as it was for many of her kind. Leprechauns spend much of their lives underground, so sunlight sometimes hurt their eyes, but Cleo rarely carried such trivial things as sunglasses around with her, not when she could steal them. Besides, she preferred to travel light, especially on heists. She drew curious looks as she strode through the museum, searching for her target. Cleo knew exactly how she must look in her emerald green romper, with her mane of bouncy, untamable blonde curls and the curved golden daggers strapped to each hip, like a gunslinger's irons, all topped off with those cute new sunglasses. Plus, there was all the gold she wore. Big gold hoop earrings, golden rings on each finger, a golden ring in her nose, and gold piercings in other places that only the luckiest of boys or girls ever saw. Leprechauns loved gold. It was sort of a requirement. Sure, she turned heads, but flying under the radar had never been Cleo's style. Better to draw people's attention and use it to her advantage. Every sleight-of-hand artist in the world knows the magic that can be wrought by manipulating a person's attention. And Cleo, even at only 18 years old, was a better magician than most. The mission. Cleo scanned the rows and rows of old cars. There were 1930s Cadillacs with big, swoopy fenders and 1920s Rolls-Royces with huge round headlights like the staring eyes of rift monsters. There were loads of other cars, too, models she'd never heard of. Auburns and Packards, Duesenbergs and Pierce Arrows, Cords and Spades. Spades Motors. Interesting. Spades stood for Morbus, one of the 4 suits of luck gods. Each of the suits had its own shell businesses that spanned the globe, but it was interesting that the Morbus had once had a car company and a connection to Detroit. That might explain why the rift was here. The rift was an energy field, a portal, the nexus of luck power in this world. It shifted arbitrarily every few months or years, and the gods and their attendant peri, luck beings, followed it, like fish and birds and whales all chasing the same plume of plankton. They were, in a way, their own savage ecosystem. But the Spades Motors car wasn't what Cleo had come to steal. She found her target a few minutes later. It wasn't extraordinary to look at compared to some of the huge, gleaming luxury cars she'd already seen. But then, many of the most luck-charged items seemed pretty ordinary at first glance. This one was a white Porsche, a 1950s vintage. A famous film star had once crashed it and died inside. Why some morbid collector had bothered restoring it, Cleo could only guess, but it was a very unlucky vehicle. Which meant Bartholomew Barth would pay handsomely to get it. Which was why her arse-faced brother Lorcan had sent her to steal it. She paused at the stanchion near her target, pretending to read the plaque that told the car's story, and scanned the room. It only took her a moment to find the perfect mark, a young security guard with a pitiful attempt at a mustache growing above his upper lip. He stood on the other side of a vintage Ferrari, ogling her. Ogling boys were always her favorite victims. "Hey!" she said, waving him over. He looked over his shoulder, then pointed to himself questioningly. "Yes, you dummy! Come here!" He shambled over, wearing a goofy grin which confirmed her suspicion that he'd barely talked to a pretty girl in his life. He stood a few inches shorter than Cleo, and his blinky little eyes lingered on her chest as she leaned down to his level. "Listen," she said, I'm a bit of a social media influencer, and I promised my followers that I'd get a pic from behind the wheel of one of these cars. Do you mind if I just hop in that one real quick?" She pointed to the Porsche. He blinked at the car, then looked around, probably scanning for a supervisor. "I'm not supposed to." She hooked a finger on his belt and tugged him suggestively closer. "Just for a second," she sang. "Please." Plan B was to convince him to take her in the back, then smash him over the head with something heavy, find the keys to this car, and take off. But Plan A was faster, and she hoped he'd play along for both their sakes. He scratched his head and huffed a sigh, agonizing over the decision. "Come on, buddy, do yourself a favor." "Do you have a phone?" she asked. He paused, then nodded. "Then you can take the picture. I'll give you my number and you can text it to me, okay?" Something clicked in the guard's La Brea tar pit of a brain. "Okay." "Great," she said, already springing over the velvet rope, opening the door and getting into the car. She smiled while he fumbled to take out his phone. "Oh, shoot," she said suddenly. "I lost my contact." Pulling her knees up onto the seat, she stuck her head under the steering wheel, giving Dummy a nice, distracting view of her derriere while she pretended to look for her contact. In fact, she was hotwiring the car. A few seconds later, the engine sparked to life with a satisfying rumble, and Cleo sat up, swung her legs down into place, and jammed her foot down on the clutch. "Wait, what are you? You can't," the guard blubbered. "Don't forget to take a picture!" Cleo shouted, flipping him off as she slammed the car into gear. It lurched forward, knocking down the stanchion, then blazing down the museum aisle, while tourists dove out of the way, screaming. The white Porsche careened to a halt with a small shower of sparks, one wheel resting on the curb. "Damned machine," Cleo grumbled as she got out. Cars were a devil's wagon, 9 out of 10 leprechauns agreed. Why blaze around in a dirty, smoke-spewing machine when you could travel from place to place elegantly and instantly via the leprechaun underground? The only reason Cleo had learned to drive cars was so she could steal them, a talent that had obviously come in handy today. Judging from the 3 police cars she'd lost on the way, she wasn't half bad at it either. Her parking, on the other hand, left something to be desired. She slammed the door, stretched, and exhaled the tension from the car chase, looking up at the Fisher Building, which rose before her like an industrial-age Art Deco temple. It was an icon of downtown Detroit, and frankly, it was Cleo's sort of place. Weird and fancy. Plus, the lobby was covered in gold leaf, a leprechaun haunt indeed. The only mark against the place was that it housed Barth's menagerie of luck on its upper floors. The menagerie was one of her least favorite places in the world, but unfortunately, it was her destination. A valet called out from behind her. Miss? The keys?" It was one of Barth's clone guards she saw. They were all identical, with their puffy hair and olive skin and hazel eyes. They were fairly cute, actually, if there weren't so damned many of them. Hooking up with one boy could be confusing enough, but one with 100 doppelgangers? No thanks. "No keys. Just keep it running," she said, and she flipped him a gold half yunxi for a tip. Inside, Cleo stepped off the elevator on Barth's floor, pausing for a moment before the weird statue in the lobby to give it the standard genuflection, touching her ear, eye, nose, mouth, and heart. "There, you bunny-eared bastard," she thought. She was not religious, and the statue gave her the willies. But the gods would have their due, wouldn't they? Even the dead ones. Cleo glanced around the high-ceilinged room. It was quiet, except for the muted sounds of animals, lucky or unlucky ones, braying and chittering in their cages down the menagerie's many labyrinthine hallways. She shivered. God, she hated this place. Best to get her business done and get out. "Barth, get your arse out here and bring my gold!" she shouted, eyeing the porthole-shaped two-way mirrors along one wall, from which she knew Barth's minions were watching. A few moments later, sure as sin, Barth's assistant sauntered in. All Sylph looked to Cleo a bit like movie aliens, all bald and stretched out, and Lura's skin was a bit lavender too, making her look even odder than most of her kind. When she saw Cleo, her tiny sylph mouth gave a condescending smile. "Cleopatra," she said, "Lorcan told us you might be coming by. I take it you had luck getting a hold of that car?"
"Luck?" Cleo snorted. "I'd call it skill. But yes, the car's outside."
"Lovely," Lura said. "Can I offer you some—"
"I'll take my gold," Cleo said. "Then I'll be on my way."
Lura gave a little bow, dipping her long neck. "As you wish. Right this way." Their footsteps echoing on slate floors, Cleo followed Lura past cages of charmed or hexed creatures that gazed at her plaintively as she passed. They passed among display cases full of lucky weapons, shelves of hexed items. The place smelled of shit and tears and night sky. Cleo hated it. But anything for gold, right? That was the leprechaun's motto. At last, they reached a second lobby where several hallways met. A round velvet couch sat in the center of the space, and 3 grandfather clocks, each keeping a different time, ticked discordantly along the walls. "Bartholomew will be with you shortly," Lura said with another dip of her head, and she departed. Not a moment too soon for Cleo. She crossed to the couch thinking she would sit, but she felt too restless, too on edge. So she made an orbit around the couch, trying to mentally distance herself while keeping aware of her surroundings. That was the thing about the sylph. You never knew when one might betray you. And Cleo was no stranger to the sylph cages. Enough years had passed that she could almost think of the little girl she'd been as a separate person. She could imagine that her past belonged to someone else, a story she'd read in a book, a movie she'd watched late one night. But at moments like this, the truth felt way too close, like a monster on the other side of the wall, waiting to burst through, and a sound. Crying. She paused. For a moment, she thought she might be imagining her own wail echoing from the distant past. But no, the crying was real. "Ignore it. Lots of things happen in this place. Curiosity killed the cat." "But cats only have claws," she answered herself. "I have knives, and I know how to use them." So down the hall she went, following the heart-wrenching wail. She turned a corner, then another, and found herself standing outside one of the menagerie's many cages. Its door was ajar. Inside, 2 clones identical to the valet she'd met outside were coaxing a young boy onto a scale. Cleo was no good at judging kids' ages, but she guessed this one was probably around 5 or 6, and he was certainly human, not sprite or goblin. He wore sweatpants with the waistband of a pair of dinosaur-patterned underwear poking out the top, and his upper torso was shirtless, revealing spindly arms and a chest with ribs like a xylophone. She watched as the clones got the boy onto the scale and stepped back. The scale dropped dramatically, and the needle on the gauge swung nearly all the way around the dial, so far that Cleo's jaw actually dropped. This wasn't a scale measuring weight. It measured yunxi, luck units, and the kid was off the charts. This was a very, very, very lucky boy. "In the market for a kid?" a voice behind her said. Cleo turned and saw the absolute last person she expected. Or not person. Goblin. "Var?" she said, trying to conceal her astonishment. He folded his muscular arms and grinned his crooked grin at her. Varsmith Ninepenny looked exactly the same as he had back in Rio 3 rift shifts ago, when they'd been heavily into each other. If anything, he was taller, more muscular, his jaw squarer, his tattoos more numerous, the wickedly amused glint in the dark lavender eyes even glintier.
"Security in this place must really have gone to shit if they let you in here," Cleo said, recovering herself enough to banter.
Varsmith chuckled. It's worse than you think. I'm head of security here now. It's a new gig. Barth had an incident recently and decided to bring in the big guns. Cleo couldn't help but eye Varsmith's amply muscled arms. Guns indeed.
"Where's your mini-me?" she asked.
Human pop culture got a lot of things wrong, and one of them was goblins. They looked less like monsters and more like energy drink-addicted asshole drummers from second-rate rock bands, albeit with oddly colored eyes and barely noticeable retractable claws, which, once upon a time, Cleo had teasingly referred to as Var's little kitty paws. Hobgoblins, on the other hand, closely resembled the human idea of a goblin, with their greenish skin, shark-like teeth, hunched backs, and creepy, malformed hands. All goblins had a hobgoblin. They were twins, the hobgoblin's face an eerily ugly version of its goblin counterpart. Their luck, like their beauty, was split up unevenly too. While goblins generally enjoyed strong bodies and good luck, their hobgoblin was a receptacle of everything bad and grotesque. Goblins were handsome, hobgoblins were ugly. Goblins were strong, hobgoblins were sickly. Still, hobgoblins were not to be underestimated. Their second-class status often made them mean and devious. Whenever you saw a goblin, their hobgoblin was never far behind, so Cleo found herself looking around uneasily for Varsmith's rotten counterpart Smithvar, as if he would pop out from some hiding place and start gnawing her ankle like an ill-trained Rottweiler. Var shrugged. Smith is around somewhere. What brings you to the Motor City? Aside from the rift, I mean.
"I boosted a hexed car to sell to Barth," Cleo said, then turned her attention back to the boy. "What's with the kid?"
The clones had him off the scale and were clapping a pair of manacles on him, but his little arms were so skinny they slipped right out. The clones scratched their heads and mumbled to one another, trying to decide what to do about it. Var nodded toward the boy. Barth picked him up yesterday at auction. Apparently, the kid is pretty juiced, and Barth is trying to figure out how to get the most out of him.
"The most?" Cleo asked.
You know, part him out. Var made a cutting motion at his wrist. It was common practice among Sylph to cut up lucky animals, dry their limbs, and sell them as charms. The thought made Cleo shudder. Juice him. Sometimes Sylph would crush lucky animals, then bottle their blood and fluids to sell as a luck-inducing potion. Double shudder. Or just sell him outright. That seems like the best option to me. The kid is so young, his luck might increase a lot. Someone could milk his luck for years. Or clone him. He's got to have more luck than these dumbasses. He gestured toward the clones, who were now stuffing the manacles with rags in an attempt to make them fit the boy's wrists.
"What's his pedigree?" Cleo asked.
A human with luck like that had to get it from somewhere. Maybe he was even the spawn of a powerful luck god. They sure liked to procreate, and there were always a few unclaimed luck god spawn floating around out in the world. Finding one could be a gold mine, if the finder played their cards right. That's the problem, Var said. The kid won't talk, and believe me, Barth has tried. Cleo didn't want to imagine what that damned sylph might have done to get the boy to open up to him.
Good for the kid for keeping silent.
You could ask Barth about him if you're interested,
Var suggested.
But I don't think he'd trade the kid for a car, no matter how hexed it is.
Cleo snorted. No, what would I do with a kid anyway?
My question is, what would you do with a grown man?
Var asked, looming closer to her. He smelled good, rich scents of spice and clover mixed with some deeper, more ancient smell, like wet earth after a rain. Unbidden images flooded her mind. She and Var together, gasping as one, their sweat mingling. It wasn't a single memory. In her mind, their entire time together, 3 months in all, had melded into one endless afternoon of carnal discovery that had left her weak-kneed and hungry. So hungry. That was something she remembered about being with Var. No matter how much she had of him, she always wanted more. He bit his lower lip, those teeth of his just a little sharper than human teeth. Remember the rest, she told herself, before the dizzy yearning could carry her away. Things with Var hadn't ended well the first time around. Besides, she'd heard things about him since they'd last met. Goblins often worked for Sylph as bounty hunters, tracking down escaped Lux slaves, taking out enemies, helping the higher-up Sylphs consolidate their power. Var had worked his way up the ranks over the last few years, which meant he had to be effective, relentless, and brutal. A killer. Still, one night wouldn't be so dangerous, would it?
Ah, my favorite leprechauness,
a deep voice announced, and Cleo turned to find Bartholomew Barth, a sylph like Lura, prancing into the room. Rings glittered on his fingers, and he was wearing that insufferable cape of his.
Nice work on that car, I must say. I didn't think any leprechauns could drive, but your brother assured me you could pull it off, and here you are.
Sure, Lorcan would never hesitate putting Cleo in danger if that meant making a buck, but Cleo didn't say that. Instead, she held out her hand. My pay?
Oh, yes.
Barth feigned absent-mindedness and placed a small leather sack in her hand. She could smell the gold inside, the sweet, metallic, weighty scent of it. But the sack was laughably light. This better be the key to the safe where you've put my actual payment, Cleo said.
Barth laughed. A charming sense of humor, just like Lorcan. I'm afraid this is all I can manage, my dear. You know, there's quite a bit of turmoil going on at the moment. I'm not sure if you've kept up with the news from the luck gods, but the Blackovers and the Valentines recently had a—
I could give a rat's ovaries about the luck gods, Cleo said. Give me my money. Barth stood up straighter, feigning wounded dignity.
Varsmith, do you see how she's talking to me?
Var smirked.
I see it, and I believe it.
You think I'm afraid of him? Cleo demanded, thumbing at the goblin. We've wrestled before. I ended up on top.
Well, not every time,
Var said.
In fact, one time I distinctly remember ending up behind you.
A charming story, I'm sure,
Barth snapped.
But I have other matters to attend to. Cleopatra, thank you for your services, but this is all you will be paid today. If you remain here in our lovely city—
Lovely? Detroit? Cleo snorted.
Then I'm sure I'll have more work for you. Var, please show Cleopatra out.
Fine. Thank you, Cleo said, reaching to shake the sylph's hand. It was cold and wet, like grasping a raw chicken breast. As she walked away, she hazarded one last backward glance at the lucky boy. The clones had gotten him situated and closed his cage. He sat there, crisscross applesauce, a too serious look on his little face, watching her go.
Well, I guess I'll see you around,
Var said when they'd reached the entrance. Not if I can help it, Cleo said. He folded his arms, showing off those beautifully sculpted forearms of his. The worst part was, he actually looked tempting.
"You haven't changed a bit,"
he said fondly. "I doubt you have either," Cleo said. "Unfortunately." He laughed, shaking his head. "Good luck with the new job," she said, taking one last glance around the mausoleum-like decor of the menagerie's lobby, then turning to go.
"Cleo,"
he said.
"Barth's ring, please."
This, at last, made Cleo smile. She turned around and tossed the ruby ring to the goblin, who caught it effortlessly. "I see you have changed," she said. "You're more observant."
"It doesn't take a detective to figure you out, Cleo,"
Var said.
"Everywhere you go, you steal something, even if it's just a heart."
It was a cheesy line, but Cleo felt her cheeks warming despite herself. "Well, then I guess you must be wondering what I stole from you," she said, and turned to go. But not before having the satisfaction of seeing Var pat his pockets. As the sun dipped toward the horizon, Cleo still walked the streets of Detroit more or less aimlessly. She could go back to her lair. She could pass through any door and travel almost anywhere in the world, as long as she had a concept of her destination. That was the beauty of having a leprechaun key. But something was holding her in Detroit. It wasn't the rift. It wasn't the prospect of making more money working for that scumbag sylph Bartholomew Barth. It certainly wasn't her pain-in-the-ass brother Lorcan. It wasn't even Var and all the naughty possibilities he presented. Maybe it was the boy. A boy lucky enough to interest Barth offered so many possibilities. One could sell a boy like that to any of a dozen high sylph, any of whom would be glad to make a small fortune and gain bragging rights over Barth in the process. Better yet, one could sell him to the luck gods. Those quibbling demigods had more money than all the sylph combined, and they were always trying to get the upper hand over one another. The Blackovers might buy the boy and use him against the Valentines. The Valentines might buy him to keep him out of the hands of the Blackovers. The Morbus were wiped out, good riddance to them, but the Diamantes were still around, and they had more money than Uthul himself on his fattest day. Those diamonds would buy a lucky boy just because they could. And if she could figure out the boy's pedigree, even better. Any of the luck gods, red or black, would pay handsomely to get their own spawn back. Not just for sentimental, familial reasons, but because they could groom the kid to rise in the ranks. Cleo could sell the kid and make a fortune. All she had to do was get her hands on him, then get him to talk to her. True, she knew nothing about kids, but she also knew next to nothing about cars, and she'd outdriven a bunch of cops today. How hard could talking to a kid be compared to that? Barth had ripped her off on that Porsche deal. He owed her. And wouldn't it be sweet to swipe something valuable right out from under Varsmith's handsome goblin nose? The door creaked open, revealing the hallway beyond. Cleo crept into the menagerie, shutting the door behind her, then carried on, step after quiet step. The halls were dim, lit only by quavering phosphorescent night globes mounted every dozen or so feet along the walls. Creatures shuffled in their cages. In the distance, something, human or animal, screamed, then went silent. Soon, Cleo came upon the room with the round couch. There she paused, trying to remember which was the correct corridor. Everything looked the same in this blasted place. The menagerie was like a zoo crossed with a crypt, furnished by the interior designer of a Dracula movie. Finally, Cleo chose a path and moved swiftly down it. There it was, on her right, the boy's cage. She approached quietly and peered through the bars in the dim light. The boy was gone. No, there, a movement in the shadows. "Hey," Cleo whispered. "Come here. It's okay. I'm here to help you." A few seconds passed, then a slight figure coalesced out of the shadows. It was the boy. He regarded her with wide, unblinking eyes, his brow furrowed as if he were trying to puzzle her out. "I'm here to help you," she said again, then glanced around. "I just need to find the—" She glanced at the boy again and saw him pointing. She followed the gesture to a small lever on the wall. "Thanks," she whispered. Click. She pushed the lever up and the cage's bars slid upward. So far, so good. But there were ways to detect when someone used a leprechaun door. Var and his clones would have been alerted when she came in, and they'd be coming. Cleo had to hurry. A sound. A scrape? A shuffle? Something. She reached out a hand to the boy. He didn't take it. "Come on, we've got to go," she hissed. He didn't move. "You want them to squish you into juice?" she demanded. Wrong thing to say. The boy backed farther into the shadows. Another sound, coming closer. "Look, let's make a deal," she whispered quickly. "What do kids like? Whatever it is, I'll give it to you. Toys? Candy? Puppies?" The last elicited a tiny smile. "Puppies? You like pets?" she asked. He nodded. "Okay, I'll get you one, I promise. But you've got to come, now, otherwise—" "The X," a grimy voice said. Cleo turned toward a sound, and a figure, half a head shorter than the boy and 4 times as broad, stepped out of the shadows. It was Var's hobgoblin, Smithvar. The sight of him immediately reminded Cleo of one of the reasons things never worked out with Var. Having a creepy, deformed version of your boyfriend lurking around was a real mood killer.
"I never liked you,"
Smithvar growled, and Cleo saw he was brandishing a warhammer with a handle almost as long as he was tall.
"I'm glad I'll get to smash your head in."
"By all means, try," Cleo said, drawing her double daggers. Instead of attacking, Smithvar took out his phone. "Oh, no you don't. No calling, big brother," Cleo said, sprinting at him. Her plan was to charge in like a bull and bowl him off his feet, knocking the phone away. But the hob was clever. He crouched, lowering his center of gravity, and when Cleo ran into him, it was like hitting a small boulder. This would have been the moment to slice him to ribbons with her daggers, but something, probably his resemblance to Var, stopped her. In her moment of hesitation, Smithvar brought his hammer down. On Cleo's foot. Pain wailed like a siren from her metatarsals and shot up her leg. She hopped backward, cursing, tried to put weight on her foot, and fell. The hob's phone had fallen to the ground, and Cleo could hear Var's voice coming from it, a tinny shout.
"Smithy, where the hell are you? You in trouble? Smith!"
Var'd be out hunting for them in no time, and he'd probably have Barth's whole clone battalion with him. The hob came forward, a sick gleam in his yellow eyes.
"Bye-bye, leprechaun girl,"
he said, and raised his hammer over his head with both hands. It slipped out of his hands, spinning in a wide arc, and clattered against the far wall. Smithvar cursed, looking over his shoulder at his lost weapon. Cleo looked back too, to find the boy standing behind her. A lucky boy indeed. Lucky for Cleo. She spun and, using her good foot, swept Smithvar's legs out from under him. His head struck the slate floor with a crack, but Cleo didn't pause to see if he was okay. She scrambled to her feet, grabbing the boy's hand, and limped desperately for the nearest door. As they went, she could still hear Var's voice from the fallen phone shouting,
"I'm on my way, Smithvar. You tell whoever attacked you they're dead. Dead!"
Half an hour later, Cleo sat in a booth at a Coney Island diner, watching the boy stuff his mouth with pancakes slathered in strawberries and whipped cream. It was extraordinary that he could eat so much and still remain so scrawny. But then, there were a lot of things about humans that were odd.
And human kids, as it turned out, were even odder than the adults. Barth couldn't get the kid to talk, but Cleo had just bought him some pancakes and chocolate milk, and now he wouldn't shut up. Except when he was chewing, which, to be fair, was a lot. "So let's go over this again," Cleo said. "Your mother is a waitress in Miami. You never knew your dad. You tried to run away from home one night and someone kidnapped you and brought you to a sylph." The boy nodded. "Why did you run away?" He shrugged.
Mommy is mean?
"You would go home, though, if you could, right?" Cleo asked. The boy shook his head vigorously. Fair enough. Cleo knew something about cruel parents. That was one thing humans and leprechauns had in common. Parents could be shits. "What were you doing when you got kidnapped?" The boy licked a glob of whipped cream off the back of his hand. More of it hung from his chin like a white goatee, and Cleo had to resist the urge to wipe it off with a napkin.
I went to a carnival,
The boy said.
People started to notice that I was winning all the games because I had so many prizes. I had a huge Pikachu. It was so awesome, but the tall lady wouldn't let me keep it.
"What tall lady?"
The one who brought me to the first alien guy. She looked like all the other ladies at the alien's house.
Cleo was able to decode what the boy meant easily enough. A clone had noticed the kid's luck and brought him to a Miami sylph, probably Constantine Abbas. Abbas had taken the kid to auction where Barth had picked him up, hoping to make a profit. So far, so good. "Let's back up," Cleo said. "In Miami, where did you live? House or apartment?"
Apartment?
"Big or small?"
Pretty small. Mommy and I had to share a bedroom.
Okay, so Mom wasn't the one with the luck. Did you ever meet your dad?
Once. I was really little.
What do you remember? The kid took another huge bite of pancake and began masticating it slowly, in a way that made Cleo think of a dinosaur chewing a treetop. She glanced toward the front of the restaurant impatiently. Var would be on their trail soon, and he would be pissed. Her only hope was to offload the kid before he caught up with them, then get out of town. Fortunately, no one was outside the restaurant. Yet. There was just the lonely street, a few streetlights, and the occasional car whooshing past. The boy finally managed to swallow his bite.
My dad was big. He gave me a video game system.
Okay, so Dad had some money. That was good. "What about his hands?" she asked, holding up her own. "Do you remember anything about the palms of his hands?" The kid's eyes lit up.
They glowed.
Jackpot. Daddy was a luck god.
Mommy said it was just a dream, but I really remember it. His hands had lights in them.
"What color?" Cleo leaned in eagerly. "Did they glow red or more of a dark purplish?" The boy scrunched up his face, thinking. He shrugged.
Don't know.
Cleo tapped the palm of her hand again. "Do you remember the symbol on there? Was it a heart? A diamond? Like something on a deck of playing cards?" The boy tilted his head, thinking. As he did so, he dipped his head down, stuck out his tongue, and licked a gooey strawberry thoughtfully. God, kids were gross.
I don't know. I never saw that part of his hands, just the light. He mostly kept his hands in his pockets or like this.
The boy held up a fist.
I think him and Mommy wanted to keep the lights a secret, but I saw it. I really did.
Cleo nodded. "I believe you." This was good news. The kid was the son of a luck god. All she had to do was make the rounds to all 4 suits. Well, the 3 that were left. Someone would recognize the kid and want to keep him safe. That or they'd want a chess piece and would pay handsomely for him. Either way, someone would take the kid off her hands and she could be on her way.
Was my dad magic?
The boy asked.
Do I have magic too? Is that how I win everything all the time?
As if in response to the boy's story, a country pop song came on the restaurant's sound system.
Carny Boy. The insipid tune had played on all the radio stations incessantly for weeks, dubbed Song of the Summer by the musical powers that be. Ugh. Could the boy have willed the song to play? That could be more evidence for some extremely potent luck powers. Well, your dad might have magic. Sort of, Cleo said. It made sense that the kid wanted to know more about his heritage, but Cleo didn't really feel like getting into all of that now. Valentines were hearts, Diamantes were diamonds, Blackovers were clubs, Morbus were spades, except they all got wiped out. The red suits control good luck, the black suits control bad. They were organized in rank like in decks of playing cards. 2 at the bottom, ace at the top. Kings and queens ran the show, and they were always vying for power, trying to tip the balance of luck in their own favor. And the other peri, like leprechauns or goblins, they lived or died by whatever luck they could get, and bought and sold luck wherever they could. Humans did too, in a way. They just didn't know it was happening. And most often, their luck took the form of money. It might have seemed at first blush that what the boy had said about the carnival, that things tended to work out in his favor, implied that he was the spawn of a red suit, a good luck god. But Cleo was savvy enough to know this was not necessarily the case. Winning a bunch of carnival games could have been a result of good luck for the boy or bad luck for the person running the carnival game. Different powers could bring about the same result. The boy might have good luck powers or bad. Cleo didn't have the time or the inclination to explain any of this to the kid. If he was a luck god's child, the luck gods could educate him.
Are you magic too?
The boy pressed. Cleo smiled and glanced around. No one seemed to be listening to them. I'll tell you a secret, all right? The kid nodded eagerly. I'm a leprechaun. The boy's eyes went wide. He bounced up and down in his seat.
Do you live at the end of a rainbow?
No.
Do you have a pot of gold?
I have a lot more than a pot's worth.
You seem tall for a leprechaun.
You seem short for a human. She rolled her eyes. Leprechauns aren't short anyway. That's fairy tale nonsense.
Do you have a 4-leafed clover?
No, she said. What the hell would I want with a... Her phone vibrated, making her jump. The message, as she feared, was from Var. You have been a very naughty girl, Cleopatra. Barth is pissed about that boy. Smith has a headache, which means I have a headache. We're coming for you, and when we get you... Cleo put her phone down. She'd read enough, and her heart felt like a fist punching in her chest. Let's go, she said.
But my chocolate milk...
Now, Cleo said. Outside, Cleo held the boy by the arm and hustled him up the street, her head swiveling left and right as she scanned for danger. She could almost see Smith Var lurking behind every shadow, imagined Varsmith grinning at her from behind the wheel of every passing car.
Did you tip the waitress?
The boy asked. Huh? Cleo said.
Did you tip the waitress?
The boy said more slowly. No, Cleo scoffed. I didn't even pay.
Why not?
The boy asked. Because paying is for chumps.
What?
The boy said. Cleo groaned inwardly. She should have just lied and told the kid she'd left a 20 on the table. It's an art form, she said. Okay? It's called dining and dashing. The boy frowned.
Isn't that stealing?
It sure as hell is.
But stealing is bad.
Cleo snorted. Did I give you the impression I was good? The boy's frown deepened.
So you're a bad guy?
I am a bad young lady, if you must put it in such black and white terms, but I prefer morally gray.
What's that?
Cleo sighed. Look, I stole you, right? Aren't you glad I did? The boy considered the question for an annoying length of time.
Yes,
he said at last. Well, There you go, she said. Just because someone possesses something doesn't mean they deserve it, any more than Barth deserved you. Half the time people have things because they snatched them from someone else. I just snatched them away again. It's the circle of life, she said, walking again. The boy walked along behind her silently for a moment, pondering her words.
I saw the fork, too, he said at last.
What fork?
The one you took. That's stealing, too. What are you going to do with it anyway? Are forks worth a lot of money?
No. Cleo laughed, taking the fork she'd stolen from the restaurant out of her pocket.
Then why did you steal it?
Why do you ask so many dumb questions? Cleo asked. Then she felt bad about it. She stopped and turned to the boy. Everywhere I go, I take something. It's like a little game I play.
Why?
He asked. Cleo started to rattle off a clever answer, then paused. The fact was, she didn't have a clever answer. It was a hell of a question the kid had asked. Why did she steal constantly? There were various answers she'd given herself at different times. To stay sharp, to get an advantage over other people, to prove her superiority. Because she could. Because it was who she was. The real answer was all these things and none of them. She held the fork up in front of the boy. Watch. She concentrated her energy and felt the fork warm between her finger and her thumb. Next came that familiar hot metal smell. As they both watched, the fork's color swirled, then shifted from silver to gold.
Whoa,
the boy said. Here you go, Cleo said, handing the fork to the kid. I stole you a golden fork. Now shut up and come on. Lorcan stood in the center of the lavish living room of the Diamantes mansion, his arms folded. He had a toothpick clenched between his golden teeth, and his green Celtics baseball cap was, as usual, tilted at a jaunty angle. Cleo's brother looked like a leprechaun who'd gotten a record deal at a second-rate rap label, or like an Irish MMA fighter who'd never make the big leagues. Cleo could never quite decide which.
You stole this kid from Bartholomew Barth?
Lorcan demanded.
How stupid are you? I send you to drop off a car and you steal a boy.
First of all, you don't send me anywhere, Cleo said. You referred me to a job for which I agreed to pay you a finder's fee. The employer in that job decided to rip me off, and I took the boy to make sure I was fairly compensated. Lorcan barked a laugh.
Right. And now Barth is going to compensate you by hunting you down and ripping out your spine. You remember what happened to that sprite Forsyth when he tried to double-cross Barth on that clone deal?
Cleo shrugged, rolling her eyes.
I remember. They had to clean him up with a wet dry vac. And do you know who Barth has running his security detail these days?
Lorcan pressed.
Varsmith the goblin.
Yes, I'm fully aware, Cleo said.
That guy is a bad character,
Lorcan went on.
And I don't say that lightly. I heard about a job he did with the Blackovers in South America where they—
Lorcan, stop, Cleo said. I'm not here to be lectured. Are you going to get me an audience with the Diamantes or not? Lorcan glared at her, smoldering.
Sure, for 50%.
Ha! Go to hell.
Fine. 20, final offer.
Lorcan said.
Just to keep you from winding up a rug stain.
You're a bastard, Cleo said. Lorcan blew her a kiss.
Do you two hate each other?
The boy asked.
No,
Lorcan said. Yes, Cleo said at the same time. Lorcan shook his head, laughing.
My little sister. Wait here. I'll ask if they'll see you. For 20%,
he added as he walked away. When her brother was gone, Cleo turned to the boy. Here's the thing to know about the diamonds, she said. They're greedy.
Like you?
He asked innocently.
I mean, you steal from people.
Not like me, she snapped. I take things to get by. They run the world economy. Sweatshops, coal mines, fisheries, lumber operations, Wall Street, you name it. If it makes money, they have their sparkly manicured fingers in it. You end up with the Diamantes, you'll have the world licking milk out of the palm of your hand. But you'll have to get rid of that stealing is bad stuff. Diamantes steal. It's called business. You join them, you'll have to learn to be greedy. Got it?
Okay.
The boy nodded. Lorcan returned a few minutes later and led them through a leprechaun door, down the hall and into an opulent office. A row of windows ran along one wall, looking down on a vast workspace filled with cubicles. Standing behind a desk and gazing down at it all stood the most beautiful woman Cleo had ever seen. She was tall, her long legs perfectly muscled beneath her pencil skirt, and the face she turned to them, framed by glittering platinum hair, was like that of an angel. But not a biblical angel, terrible and terrifying. No, she was more like an angel next door. An angel you'd like to be friends with. Or make out with. Or...
Danusia, this is my sister Cleopatra. Cleo, this is Danusia, the Jill of Diamonds.
Charmed, the woman said with a quirk of a smile. Wordplay. Great. Danusia, the Jill, put her hand out, and Cleo glimpsed the glowing red diamond on her palm, felt the good luck power thrumming through her as they shook hands. Luck gods were so powerful it was unnerving, and Cleo hoped she could get this over with fast. The Jill's eyes drifted to the boy, who stood by the door like a frightened rabbit. "Is this the one?" she asked. Cleo noticed she had a British accent. "Yes," Cleo said. "I got him from—" "Lorcan told me," Danusia said. "Come here, boy." Timidly, the boy approached her, and she squatted, bringing her face down to his level.
"You're pretty,"
he said. "So I've been told," she replied, staring into his face. "Give me your hand." The boy hesitated. "Do it," Cleo said. "It's okay," Danusia soothed. "I won't hurt you." Tentatively, the kid put out his hand. Danusia held it, then placed her other hand over his, palm to palm, and shut her eyes. Red light pulsed from her palm for a moment, then ceased. Danusia opened her eyes, frowning. "Well?" Cleo said. The Jill stood. "I can feel that he has luck, but I can't tell you if it's good or bad. He's not a Diamante, though." Cleo felt a tug of disappointment. "You could still take him," she suggested, "to keep him out of the other suit's hands." The Jill's perfect brow furrowed as she looked at the boy. "No, I don't think so. He's a child. Children are very dirty, generally. In fact, he's very dirty right now." She reached for a hand sanitizer on her desk, pumped a squirt into her hands, and rubbed them together. The boy swiped self-consciously at his mouth with one sleeve, and Cleo cursed herself for not cleaning him up after their meal. Sloppy presentation could always ruin a sale. She should know better. "If you still have him when he's a teenager, feel free to bring him back," the Jill said. "If he's intelligent, we can put him to work. Our companies could always use a few lucky sycophants in upper management. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have to get back to work." She sat in her red leather chair and swiveled away from them. Out on the street, the boy scampered to keep up with the two leprechauns. "Well, so much for my well-connected brother," Cleo said.
"You'd have never gotten past the lobby of that place if it weren't for me,"
Lorcan groused.
"I guess you'll be wanting me to get you into the Valentines' house next."
"Can you?" Cleo asked. Lorcan arched an eyebrow.
"That depends on whether you adopt a proper attitude of gratitude."
"Pace up a rope. How's that?" Cleo said. Lorcan laughed.
"What did you steal?"
The boy piped up from behind them, and Lorcan cut Cleo a sharp look.
"You said you steal something everywhere you go," the boy said, "and I saw you—"
"Nothing. Shut your yap," Cleo said through clenched teeth. Lorcan grabbed her arm and stopped walking. He held out his hand. Rolling her eyes, Cleo took the diamond-shaped paperweight out of her pocket and handed it over.
"Jesus on roller skates,"
Lorcan exclaimed.
"Why the hell would you do that? Are you trying to get me fired? Or killed?"
"Don't be so dramatic," she said, then to the boy. It's just paperweight, but items that have been handled by luck gods tend to have some luck rub off on them. I could have gotten a few gold coins for that trinket.
Sure, or a few broken bones,
Lorcan grumbled, looking over his shoulder as he stuck the paperweight in his pocket.
I'll get this back into Danusia's office, and if we're lucky, she'll be none the wiser. Despite my better judgment, I'll try to get you in with the Valentines tomorrow, too.
He went on before she could protest.
Not tonight. It's getting late, and I'm not going to bug them until morning. You and the boy hole up for the night. I'll meet you at Grand Circus Park at 7 a.m., and I'll see what I can do.
Without so much as a goodbye, Lorcan turned at a side street and walked away.
Why is he so mad?
The boy asked. Because I got all the brains and the beauty in the family. Come on. The nearest door was the entrance to an out-of-business restaurant, but it opened easily when Cleo used her leprechaun key, and they passed down a tunnel that smelled strangely of caramel corn. A leprechaun key can connect any 2 doors in the world, as long as you have some idea where you're going. Pretty cool, eh? They emerged in Cleo's lair, and for the first time all day, the knot of tension between her shoulder blades relaxed as she unbuckled her daggers and dumped them on the table, then flopped down onto a couch. The boy made a wide-eyed circuit of the room. Cleo was so used to seeing the place that she barely looked at it anymore, but she supposed it would be rather extraordinary to someone seeing it for the first time. The room was about 20 feet by 30 feet, with walls of solid concrete, covered by a few scattered posters she'd swiped from movie theaters and concert venues. A metal toilet sat in one corner, and a small kitchenette stood in the opposite corner. There was a futon and a wardrobe in a third corner, and the final corner held the couch and a TV. In the center of the room was her workout space, a punching bag, some weights, and a rather gross yoga mat, along with a rack of guns, spears, and swords. But the most interesting part was the treasure. Gold objects sat heaped everywhere. Coins and cups, plates and vases, chains and rings, brooches and flatware lay in great piles, stuffed onto shelves and stacked in trunks. The boy took in the loot with solemn awe.
You've got booty,
he said in wonder. She laughed. You're not the first one to notice.
Where'd you get it all?
He asked. She gave him a look. You should know by now. I swiped it, or I traded for it with other things I swiped. He looked the place over again.
But why?
She smiled. Well, isn't gold pretty? He shrugged.
Sure, but...
She put her hands on her hips. But what? He took out the gold fork she'd given him and held it up.
But if you can make things into gold, why steal gold?
She nodded. A very astute question. Leprechaun gold doesn't last. That fork you have is real gold now, but in a few days all it will be is a handful of ash. What leprechauns need is true gold.
Why?
He asked. She felt her frustration rising. Bloody hell, kid, do you have to ask so many questions? Soon enough you'll be a luck god, then you won't give a cat's tit about us leprechauns and our stupid gold. We gotta get some sleep. The boy crossed his arms, sullen.
I'm not going to bed until you tell me why you need gold.
She folded her arms too. Well, I'm not telling you squat until you get your little arse to bed. They stood, glaring at one another, a mirror image. Finally, the absurdity of the pose made Cleo laugh.
I'm hungry,
the boy said. All right, fine. Sit. I'll microwave dinner for us, and I'll tell you about leprechauns and our gold.
You have a microwave?
The boy asked, as if that were the most exciting thing he'd heard so far.
Can I push the buttons?
I don't care. Knock yourself out. Cleo arranged a handful of pizza rolls on a plate, put them in the microwave, and told the kid which buttons to press. As he stared, mesmerized by the pizza rolls going around on the microwave turntable, Cleo explained why leprechauns need gold. All beings need luck to live, even humans, she said. Hearts and brains and lungs and such are all carefully balanced systems. Cells are fragile. Bad luck can do anyone in. But we peri need good luck more than normal creatures. And leprechauns. This is a big secret now, so don't you go blabbing it about, or some leprechaun will come and kick my teeth for me. Leprechauns need luck more than most. We're delicate. A bit too much bad luck and we're done for. That's why you'll always see us wearing gold, and why we always put a heart of gold someplace safe. Gold neutralizes luck power. It keeps luck from fluctuating too much. The gold we're wearing can network with the other gold in our hoard, please don't ask me how, and it protects us, see? From bad luck. Keeps us alive. The more gold, the safer we are. And so we just gather and gather and gather. The boy looked around.
So, you feel safe?
This boy and his questions. They were safe here in her lair, sure. But the idea of Varsmith and his goony doppelganger out there hunting for them still hung in the back of her mind like an upside-down bat. The microwave dinged and Cleo took out the food.
Where is this place?
The boy asked as they settled on the couch, and Cleo turned on the TV. Nowhere, she said reflexively. Then she amended. A bomb shelter in California, in Los Angeles. There was a cave-in, so the only way to reach it now is the Leprechaun Underground, which makes it the perfect lair.
A secret hideout,
the boy grinned. Exactly, she said, biting into her food.
Batman has a lair,
he said. I know that, Cleo said. Christ, I'm a leprechaun, not an idiot. The boy laughed, then looked around again.
I like it here.
Yeah, Cleo said. Me too. Cleo startled awake and blinked into the dim, shifting light. Cartoons were still on the TV. The boy's head rested lightly on her lap. They'd fallen asleep together on the couch. A chill permeated the air, like it always did early in the morning in her lair. But something else hung in the air too. An intangible tension, like the hum of a high-voltage power line. Someone was here. But that was impossible. Wasn't it? Cleo kept her body perfectly still while her eyes ranged around the room. It only took her a moment to isolate the shifting of a shadow near the fridge. Her mind spun. How could someone have infiltrated her lair? It was completely sealed off. The only way to get in was via a leprechaun door. Sure, Varsmith could easily get his hands on a leprechaun key with Barth's whole collection of luck items at his disposal. But to use a key, you had to have been to the destination before, or at least have a strong enough impression of the place you were going, and nobody else except Lorcan had been here. She'd made sure of it. The shadows shifted, its shape coalescing. Prominent cheekbones, low brow, a wicked twist to a pair of deeply kissable lips. Varsmith. But how? A half-remembered drunken night came back to her. Had she brought him back to her place? She had, obviously. Damn it. She wished fervently for a time machine so she could go back a few years and beat some sense into her younger self. But this was no time for self-loathing. They had to move now. If they were lucky, Varsmith might not have spotted them yet. The goblin walked slowly through the lair, taking in the piles of gold, and gave a low whistle. Someone has been busy. At the sound of the voice, the boy stirred. She squeezed him in an embrace, keeping him still, and whispered into his ear. I'm going to stand up. When I do, crawl to the door. Don't make a sound. With luck, the ottoman would hide the boy while Cleo distracted the goblin. Go, she whispered. Obediently, the boy slipped off her lap as she stood, stretched, and turned to Varsmith. I hope you brought coffee, she said. He smiled, taking a flask out of his jacket pocket. How about whiskey? She wrinkled her nose. What time is it?
Almost 8 a.m., but it's happy hours somewhere. Why, you have someplace to be?
She shrugged, approaching him as seductively as one can while having to pee and worrying about morning breath and trying to avoid being murdered.
I don't remember you caring much about clocks when we were together,
Var went on.
but then Rio is all a bit hazy.
He put a familiar hand on her hip as she stepped close. We could pick up where we left off, she said.
Sure, but business first. Where's the boy?
Already sold, I'm afraid. She let her body drift closer until her hips were pressed against his, her face tilted upward.
Well,
he said,
we'd better get him back. Barth had big plans for that boy.
Juicing him? She asked, trying unsuccessfully to keep the acid out of her voice.
Varsmith shook his head. No, I was wrong about that. The kid is luckier than I realized. He's going to be very useful to Barth.
Useful how?
Think about it. What's the one power greater than the sylphs?
She shrugged. The luck gods? Varsmith nodded.
Barth trains the kid up, brainwashes him to be loyal to him, then slips him into the ranks of the suits. His own inside man. So, you see, you don't have to worry about Barth hurting the kid. He'll be raised like a little prince.
I don't care about the kid getting hurt, she said.
Great.
Var smiled that handsome, sharp-toothed smile.
Then tell me where he is. After we drop him off with Barth, we can come back here.
His lips drifted down to hers. Everything about him was hard except those lips. They pressed against hers, parted them. Their tongues met, slipped slowly across one another, sending a shiver down Cleo's spine, slow as syrup to sit quivering deep in her belly.
Got him,
that grimy voice said from across the room. Cleo whipped her head around to see Smithvar standing near the far door, holding the boy by the back of his shirt. Cleo brought her knee up, slamming Varsmith in the balls. He made a sound, half cough, half scream, and doubled over. Cleo swung an elbow across, catching him in the ear and dropping him. Then she was streaking to her weapons belt, snatching up her daggers and storming towards Smithvar, who now held a gun to the boy's temple. All it took was a twitch of Cleo's will, and the air smelled of burning metal. Cleo advanced without slowing. Smithy, hasn't anyone told you why no one uses guns against leprechauns? The hob snarled as she neared, then he turned the gun away from the boy toward Cleo. Of course, he would never have harmed the boy. He was too valuable. Smithvar pulled the trigger. Nothing happened but a dull click. Turning bullets to gold nuggets, she said. Oldest trick in the book. She kicked the gun out of the hob's hands, then slashed his forearm with one of her daggers. Smithvar reflexively released the boy and stumbled backward, cradling its wounded arm and snarling. Cleo was already activating her key, stepping up to the door, steering the boy along ahead of her. Through the door they went, slamming it behind them. Cleo and the boy hustled through a verdant park in the middle of the city. Detroit was waking up around them, buses laboring past, people in suits striding to work, a homeless woman somewhere on the other side of the park singing loudly. Cleo couldn't stop looking over her shoulder, but eventually she accepted that the Smiths hadn't followed through her tunnel, which meant they had no idea where she was, for now. Her galloping heart slowed a little, and she quit dragging the kid along quite so fast.
Are they going to get me?
The boy asked, pitiful in his fear. Cleo tousled his hair roughly. "If they were going to get you, they would have just done it," she said. "Instead, I handed their asses to them, right?"
Right.
The boy gave a weak smile before glancing over his shoulder once more. "Look, forget them. Pretty soon you'll be safe at a new home," Cleo said. "Here's what you need to know about Valentines. First, their pips are hearts.
Pips?
The glowing marks on their hands. Valentines are the heartbreakers, full of lies and deceit. Yeah, they're good luck gods and they help people, but never cross them. They can be every bit as ruthless as the bad luck gods. After all, they're the ones who wiped out the Morbus, the Spades. And Spades were the bringers of death. The Valentines are hearts, sure, but you become one of them, you'll have to learn to be as heartless as a stone. Understand?"
Yes.
The boy said dutifully. "Still, better hope you're one of them," Cleo said. "Even their twos live like kings. And if they don't take you in, then—" She let the thought die.
Then what?
The boy asked. "Come on, keep up." They found Lorcan on a park bench, half a dozen crushed beer cans littering the ground around him. "Late as usual," he slurred. "Drunk as usual," she retorted, still catching her breath. "We got tied up. Uninvited guests." Lorcan hoisted himself to his feet, stumbling a little to keep his balance. "Best keep moving, then," he said. The door they found to use was the bathroom of a coffee shop. If any of the patrons thought it odd that the three of them piled in together, then never came out again, Cleo never knew. They emerged from a shed on the grounds of a gorgeous chalet-style mansion set in the shore of a lake. The Valentines compound. A sprite stood watching them, arms folded. With their weird squashed faces, backwards legs, and antlers, Cleo always thought sprites gave hobgoblins a run for their money when it came to ugly. Fortunately, they were invisible half the time.
You're late,
the sprite grumbled. "Nice to see you too, Seymour," Lorcan said.
and drunk.
Seymour shook his head.
I must be crazy to give you an audience with the king.
"You owe me, remember?" Lorcan said, a scintillation of meaning behind the words. Cleo wondered passingly what they were referring to, but was pretty sure she didn't want to know.
This the kid?
The sprite said, nodding at the boy. "No," Lorcan said. "It's a Christmas ham."
I'm hungry,
the boy said. Apparently, the mention of ham had sparked his appetite. God, kids were weird. Although Cleo had to admit she was feeling a bit peckish, too. The sprite gave the boy a smile.
We'll hit the kitchen on the way through. No one does breakfast like the Valentines. Come on.
They each snagged a delectable piece of French toast from the Valentines' opulent kitchen. After they'd made a brief hike through a mansion that seemed to Cleo like a Detroit version of Versailles, they found themselves in a modern throne room. A lean, dour-looking man sat upon the throne, running one hand thoughtfully through a mane of gray hair. At his elbow stood a honey-skinned girl with short hair, who Cleo figured to be about her own age. Seymour the sprite introduced them as King Michael and 10. The king was all business.
"So, you've brought me a boy. Why?"
Cleo paused for Lorcan to speak, but he gave her a prompting look, which was probably for the best. He was too drunk to address a king. Cleo cleared her throat. I liberated this boy from the sylph Bartholomew Barth. He's a lucky boy. Very lucky." She glanced at the boy, who stood holding his French toast with both hands, nibbling it like a squirrel with a nut. "We think he might be the child of a luck god, and I wanted to return him to his family," Cleo said. The king frowned.
"For a handsome reward, no doubt."
He rubbed his chin.
"The world is full of lucky boys, leprechaun. And unlucky ones. 10, give him a test. An indisputable one."
The girl stepped forward. Something about her movements reminded Cleo of a taut bowstring. In one smooth movement, she took a throwing knife from a sheath at her belt. Cleo wanted to step in front of the boy, to draw her own daggers and defend him, but she forced herself to stay still. "You sure he's lucky?" the girl 10 asked. Cleo nodded. The Valentine threw her knife. It flew end over end and stuck in the piece of thick French toast, its tip stopping an inch from the boy's tender throat. The kid didn't even flinch. Jesus in a unitard. The kid was so lucky it never even occurred to him that he might get hurt. Cleo couldn't help but smile, with relief more than anything.
"Hey,"
the boy said.
"My French toast."
The king grunted approvingly.
All right, he's lucky. But he's not my spawn. The Valentine most likely to be out sowing seeds is Jack.
"This boy is way too old to be Jack's," the 10 said quickly, and Cleo noted the blush that lit her cheeks. The king chuckled.
I'm sure he started early. Lord knows he covers enough ground now.
Cleo made a mental note to meet this Jack character sometime.
He's not ours.
The king made a dismissive gesture. Cleo stepped forward. "You could still take him in," she said quickly. She told herself she was trying to salvage this deal, to save herself time and offload the kid before Var caught up with them. But she knew another part of her was trying to spare the boy from what would come next. If the Valentines didn't take him, the next stop was the Blackovers. The clubs. A bad luck suit. And the truth was, she didn't want to leave the kid with the likes of them if she could help it. They were as bad as Barth. Maybe worse. "We could keep him," the 10 said to the king. "If we let him go, some other suit might pick him up and use him against us." The king rubbed his chin again, considering the 10's counsel. Finally, he shook his head.
We have enough to deal with without bringing in strays. Besides, I don't like the twinkle in that boy's eye. Jack would get a hold of him and fill that boy's head with all sorts of mischief. No.
He waved a hand at them.
Dismissed.
A few hours later, Cleo and the boy sat on a picnic table outside a high-end grocery store in Royal Oak. Normally, Cleo ate her meals in the sanctuary of her lair, but since that was now unsafe, she'd had to think of a place they could hang out and have lunch, where the goblin and his hob would never think to look for them. The grocery store seemed a likely place. Cleo liked to sit here sometimes and watch the people come and go, pushing their shopping carts. Most were women, wives and mothers. She usually pitied them for their dreary, predictable lives, but occasionally she imagined herself one of them. Wearing yoga pants, driving a shiny minivan, going home to a perfect lawn, a pristine house, a glistening kitchen, a thoughtful, normal husband, and a couple cute, messy kids. It was a world as strange and fantastical to her as the world of the peri must be to them. Speaking of kids, the boy was walking along the curb with his arms outstretched, carefully placing one foot in front of the other. "Hey, circus kid, don't fall off your high wire and get hit by a car, all right? You're valuable," she said. "Come here. You got the plan?" He nodded.
"Fill up a basket with everything that looks good. Then you walk out and I follow you a few seconds later."
She nodded.
"Why can't we go out together?"
"I don't want my gold to neutralize any of your luck," she said. "If I'm right about how lucky you are, you'll be able to walk out with a basket full of goodies and no one will look twice. Got it?" He nodded. "Great. And get me some of that good cheese they've got here. That artisan shit. Goat cheese and crackers." The kid nodded. Cleo stood, a hand on each dagger hilt. It was funny. No one ever mentioned her weapons except guys trying to flirt with her. And they always assumed they were part of a cosplay costume or something. Dummies. They went into the store and began making their way up and down aisles. All the while, Cleo kept a watchful eye out for Varsmith. Every time she turned a corner, she imagined he'd be there, smiling that seductive killer's smile while Smithvars snuck up from behind her and... "I'm jumpy," she thought. "No good." Occasionally, she'd glance at the kid and his basket. He had fruits, veggies, cheese and crackers as instructed, lunch meat, a balanced diet. He was a good kid. Too bad he'd end up a bad luck god, or worse. But then, the world corrupted everyone eventually, didn't it? Sooner or later, everyone became like blunted steel. They would rust, corrode. Gold was the only thing that remained untarnished forever. She would do well to remember it. When their circuit through the store was complete, Cleo exited and stood leaning against the wall next to the door, scanning the parking lot restlessly and waiting for the kid. She was just starting to get worried when he finally emerged, his little shoes scuffing across the sidewalk. Empty-handed. She gaped at him. "Where's the food?" He shrugged and looked down at his feet.
"Stealing is bad,"
he mumbled. She shook her head. "Good God! How about starving? You like starving? Old fool, you'd never make it 10 minutes as a leprechaun, I'll tell you that much. It's a good thing you're headed for a cushy life with the Blackovers, otherwise you'd end up without a pot to piss in." The boy looked sad, which made Cleo sad too, despite herself. She sighed, reaching into one of the cargo pockets on the leg of her romper, and took out a cheese and cracker pack and a couple of bananas. "Good thing I'm not a goody two-shoes like you are. Come on, let's eat." As twilight fell, Cleo and the boy stood outside the gates of the club's bar and brewery, one of the Blackovers' front businesses. Lorcan had set up the meeting, but in typical Lorcan fashion had declined to attend. Cleo could hardly blame him. She'd never dealt with the Blackovers directly, but she knew enough about them to be afraid. She glanced at the boy, who stood stoically at her side and knelt beside him. "Hey, you, sure you don't want to go back and live with your mom?" He shook his head adamantly. Geez, Mommy must be a piece of work if the Blackovers seemed preferable. Cleo sighed. "Look, when we go in here, the Blackovers are bastards, okay? When you're among bastards, be a bastard. None of these little kid puppy dog eyes like you're giving me right now. Got it?" The kid nodded.
"Got it."
She gave him a pat on the cheek and rose. She was just about to move, either to knock or to turn away, she wasn't quite sure which, when the electric gate buzzed and began to slide open. It revealed more or less what she'd expected, a collection of armed goons in black leather.
"Right this way, Lucky Charms,"
one of them said, gesturing inside. "Good one. I've never heard that before." Cleo side-eyed the guy with one hand on the hilt of a dagger. The thugs led Cleo and the boy into a courtyard, a sort of post-apocalyptic beer garden filled with picnic tables and decorated with the rustling hulks of old cars. The only spot of warmth or light in the place was a fire pit. A long table ran next to the pit on a raised deck, and several archgoons sat along it. The Blackovers, Cleo guessed. Their escorts paraded Cleo and the boy up to the table. A huge man sat in the center, looking like the love child of a lumberjack and a Valkyrie. Cleo recognized him from the stories she'd heard as Thad, the king of the Blackovers. He stroked a luxurious black beard and eyed them with interest.
"So, this is the pair. Making your rounds all over the city, I hear."
Great. They knew they were the last stop. That would drive the price down for sure. "The boy is the spawn of a luck god," Cleo said. "He'd be a powerful new recruit or sicko. Or a negotiating piece if you prefer. Once you determine his parentage." The big man chuckled.
"He might be mine. God knows I try to make a few babies wherever I go."
A few of his companions laughed awkwardly. Cleo looked for the queen to see what her response would be. Carlotta, her name was, but the place next to the king was empty.
"Unfortunately, we're not in the market for any brats,"
Thad said.
"We've got no nursery here, and a swing set wouldn't exactly fit the decor. I do know of someone who might be interested, though."
He glanced over his shoulder. From the shadows back by the bar, there emerged 3 figures, and Cleo felt her blood freeze in her veins. It was Varsmith, Smithvar, and Barth. "Hell of a goose chase you led us on, Cleo," Varsmith said as he approached. Gone was the flirtatiousness, replaced with a coldness that raised the hairs on the back of Cleo's neck. Barth stepped forward.
"Lucky for you, our esteemed friends don't like to clean up blood in their establishment so close to opening time. Besides, I'm a businessman, not a butcher."
The sylph held a leather sack in each hand. He tossed one onto the table where the Blackovers sat and tossed the other to Cleo. She caught it numbly.
3 times what we paid you for the car," Barth said. "It's more than fair, I'd say, considering the trouble you've caused us."
Cleo didn't have to open the bag. She knew that it was gold, real gold, just about as much as she'd hoped to get for the boy, too. She turned to the kid and knelt. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "I did try to get you into the best place I could. Barth obviously values you, so he won't let anything happen to you. Just remember what I told you." The lucky boy nodded.
Lie, steal, and be a cold-hearted, greedy bastard,
he said in that sweet little voice of his. He reached out and latched his arms around Cleo's neck and squeezed. Gritting her teeth to keep back tears, Cleo hugged him back. "Go on, go," she whispered, shrugging free, and gave him a little shove toward Barth. The kid took a few steps, then stopped and looked back at her. Those goddamned puppy dog eyes broke something in her. "Stop," she said, drawing both her daggers. Barth glanced at Varsmith, uneasy, as Cleo came forward and stood between them and the boy. Varsmith sighed. "Come on, Cleo. I thought you were smarter than this."
"Obviously she is not," Barth hissed, "and I'm out of patience. Get the boy and teach her a lesson."
In a blur of motion, Varsmith was on her, a short sword in his hand. Their blades clashed as she blocked his strikes, but he had that freaky goblin strength, and she was no match for him. He drove her back step by step until she almost tumbled backward into the fire pit. She ducked his next strike, his blade whiffing over her head. She sidestepped, but her hurt foot twisted beneath her, and she fell to one knee. Bad luck. This was a hexed place, after all. Varsmith's hand streaked toward her, claws extended, and she felt it smack, then the sting and heat of cuts. She touched her cheek with the back of her hand, and it came away bloody. The sword streaked toward her again, and she blocked it with both daggers, but the force drove her onto her back. Before she could roll out of danger, Varsmith's boot came down on her. Her stomach muscles clenched in an agonizing spasm. His next kick was to her head, and it sent the world spinning. More kicks came, too many to count. When she came back to herself, she lay on her side. She no longer held her daggers. Blood and tears blurred her vision, but through the fire she could still see Smithvar holding the boy, dragging him toward the exit. She tried to rise, to go after him, but her whole body screamed in pain, and a horrible wheeze came from her lips. From what seemed like far away, she heard King Thad's voice.
"Sorry, boys. Settle up with her later if you like, but she came here under a truce, and we'll be giving her back to her brother. We don't have our honor, what do we have, eh?"
His low, bitter laugh rang through her mind as she drifted into the oblivion of unconsciousness. She She awoke some time later and immediately wished she were back asleep. Everything hurt. Her ribs, her teeth, her head, her foot, her left arm, her soul. The boy. The boy. Damn it! She was a shit, wasn't she? Greedier than a diamond, sneakier than a heart, more savage than a club, and more murderous than a spade, too. The boy. She's lost him. She'd failed. She sat up, the world spinning, her stomach roiling with nausea. She opened her eyes and saw that she was back in her lair. "Larkin?" she said in a weak voice. No response. Good. The last thing she wanted now was a lecture from her damned brother. A sound then. A beeping. She groped for her daggers, but they weren't at her sides. She tried to stand, but her legs wouldn't respond. That beeping. Familiar. The microwave. And that smell. Pizza rolls. Footsteps. She looked up, barely able to open her eyes with the pounding of her head. What she saw couldn't be real. It was a dream. A ghost. The boy. He held a plate of pizza rolls and gave her a tiny, shy smile. It took her a moment to catch her breath before she could speak. How are you here?" He reached into the top of his shirt and pulled out something on a gold chain. Her leprechaun key.
"I stole it,"
he said proudly.
"when I hugged you."
She smiled, tears welling in her eyes. "You did?"
"I just waited until their backs were turned and went out a door," he said. "They weren't even looking. I was lucky."
She put a hand on his bony shoulder. "Listen, you can stay here," she said, "for as long as you want. Forever. Is that what you want?" The boy nodded. "Good. That's good." She pulled him into a hug, and he hugged her back so fiercely it hurt. When they pulled back, Cleo's face was hot and wet with tears, and she was so unashamed she didn't even wipe them away. "I'm really going to have to steal you a puppy now, aren't I?" she said, and the boy giggled. A thought suddenly occurred to Cleo. "Hey, what the hell is your name, anyway?" The boy bit a pizza roll.
"Gallo," he said, "after my dad."
She might have laughed if her ribs didn't hurt so badly. Gallo. His father was Gallo, the Blackover Jack. Of course. If she'd only asked the kid's name in the first place. Well, things probably would have ended up the same in the end. Or perhaps they'd have ended up worse. Perhaps they'd gotten lucky. Perhaps things had worked out in the best way possible. Gallo was a lucky boy, after all. This has been The Thief and the Lucky Boy, a Luck Gods novella. Written by J. Gabriel Gates. Performed by Paige Reisenfeld. Copyright 2022 by J. Gabriel Gates. Production copyright by J. Gabriel Gates. All rights reserved. Thank you for listening.